Hello and welcome to the Newsfeed Talk Show edition. I'm Madison Cho. Today we will be discussing how racial trauma is integrated into school curriculums, plus how two doctors are working to create a more inclusive environment for students, and to better inform others about racial trauma and discrimination in school settings. We are joined by Dr. Marcus Johnson. He is a professor in educational psychology, research, and evaluation programs, and director of the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Center at Virginia Tech, or APITA Plus, Dr. Nina Ha. Before we speak with our guests, let's learn more about how Dr. Johnson is working to educate others on racial trauma in educational settings. Unraveling Misconceptions, Illuminating Truths. Project founder and professor Dr. Marcus Johnson leads the charge in teaching historical racial trauma.
What inspired me to start this project was an interest and curiosity that I had about investigating misconceptions that learners have about racial histories. That's what inspired the project, and it's evolved since to now become a bigger project concerning teaching historical racial trauma. And so not only misconceptions about racial history, but misconceptions about the people and traumas themselves. Go over to El Centro, or we're going to get...
The project, which has been underway for over just a year, boasts a diverse array of participants from various backgrounds. Dr. Johnson hopes more will contribute to ensure it attains comprehensive insights and lasting impact. Thank you for coming on today.
Yes, thank you.
So I just have a few questions. So how did you go about finding people to participate in your project?
So I've gone about it almost in terms of word of mouth. I originally tried to form an advisory board of other historians and psychologists to help inform me on their areas of expertise, but also that's where we began talking about other scholars who I could bring into this program. And beyond that, same thing, word of mouth, trying to ask students, educators to also participate in this program.
And how can people better educate themselves on racial trauma and its impacts?
I think that a place to start is almost like a self-investigation, a self-inquiry of thinking about your own family, your own family's history. Where were they at different periods of time? What were the challenges that they may have faced, especially for American students? There are a lot of immigration stories in people's families' histories. And so asking those questions of what could have been some of the challenges that their own family members have faced if they were immigrating, or what kind of challenges do they think their families were confronted with at different periods of time in U.S. history.
Okay, so what extent should it be covered on middle school and high school curriculum?
I think that for middle school and high school curriculum, I mean, it's going to vary depending on the subject matter that's being covered in a particular year. But again, I think that at least opening it up to a conversation, opening it up as a self-inquiry. So if you're covering, if an educator, let's say in middle school, is covering U.S. history and the late 1700s or early 1800s, again, asking that question of, where do you think your families were at this time? Your great-great-great-great-grandfathers or grandmothers. What do you think their living conditions were? Again, what were some of their, what do you think some of their achievements were? What do you think some of their challenges were? And just like starting that off as a conversation and a self-inquiry. It might not necessarily be related specifically to the topic being covered in the classroom, but just to get people starting to self-reflect on where they see themselves and their families in history. I think that it could then be brought up more potently more directly in high school curriculums, but I think that at some point, even in middle school and probably even in elementary school, just starting that conversation, that question of self-reflection.
Okay, and on this topic, have you gotten the chance to speak at a middle school, high school, elementary school, or even here at Virginia Tech about the topic of racial trauma or just about this project in general?
Not yet. That is a goal of mine to get voices of middle schoolers, high schoolers, and again, maybe not necessarily me presenting to them, but me asking them, again, what are their experiences, what are their attitudes towards curriculum that involves racial histories.
Okay, and what do you think are some ways that racial trauma can be handled in a healthy manner for all the different age brackets?
So again, I think that an area to start is asking even children and early adolescents or pre-adolescents. Again, just that self-reflective question of where do they think their family histories were, or what were some of the achievements and challenges that they think their families members may have faced in their own histories.
Okay, and what are some challenges that you believe affect racial trauma's integration into the school curriculum, whether, again, that's in middle school or high school or even elementary school?
So I will admit that I think that some of the challenges of getting this curriculum into K-12 schools is going to be teachers wanting to, for better or worse, and I'll just say it bluntly, avoiding political landmines. Educators want to educate students. They want to present students with the best information, the best evidence, and the truths. And to do so in a apolitical way. And I think that the challenge, though, right now is there are political, let's say, political sentiments that are getting teachers to question how far they should push on this type of curriculum. But aside from that, that's what I also hope that this project does, is I hope that this project inspires and empowers educators to feel more confident when addressing racial history and why it's important.
Okay, that's amazing to hear.
Thank
So
you.
about the project, what were you planning to do after this study is finished?
So my area of expertise, research expertise, is an area called motivated conceptual change, which deals with how do you motivate learners to overcome their misconceptions. So that was in part the inspiration for the project. What initiated the project was just my curiosity of wondering what are some prominent misconceptions about racial histories. Again, the bigger goal is to empower educators for addressing racial histories. But where I will go after this project is to lean in even more on studying the misconceptions, identifying the prominent misconceptions, and again, trying to find ways of motivating learners to overcome them.
Do you have any plans for the future about any other digital humanities projects?
Not at this time. This project is keeping me quite busy.
All right. Can you tell us anything else about the project that we haven't already covered today?
Yes. So one of the or two of the things that I've found or discovered myself in, like I said, talking to historians, sociologists, psychologists, political scientists, is that there's a ubiquity of racial trauma in U.S. history, and that for most everybody, if they scratch at their own family histories, they'll find themselves in they'll find their families involved with racial trauma, and I think that the ubiquity needs to be stressed. Also, the intergenerationality of trauma needs to be stressed when covering racial history. Of how does trauma get passed down to other generations, to younger generations, how it affects them emotionally, how it affects them physically, that they might even be unaware of. And so those are the two things that I have found really resonate with me in wanting to promote this project.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on the talk show today.
Thank you.
Coming up, how university students think topics involving racial trauma should be taught in schools. Plus, the ways one Virginia Tech organization supports students. And how our guests are working to better inform others on the subject.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
Welcome back to this special talk show edition of the Newsfeed. I'm your host, Madison Cho. Taking Dr. Johnson's ideas into consideration, we asked Virginia Tech students at what age they think it is appropriate to introduce topics of racial discrimination into lesson plans. We also asked them how to consider detail they believe the topic should be discussed. News reporter Tucker Oakley joins us from the Virginia Tech campus.
Hello. On today's edition of the Newsfeed, we'll be asking university students what they feel is the appropriate age to teach students about racial discrimination and to what extent they feel that subject should be taught at schools.
K through probably like middle school is not a good time. I mean, you can lightly introduce it, but that should not be the focus of your lessons. I think the focus of the lessons maybe should be probably more about, like the basic cores, how to be a good person, like basic ideas and that. And I was introduced to it around 6th grade, but I would say definitely 7th to 8th grade is when it became a much more prevalent issue, like topic being raised, being a concern. People were talking about it a little bit more, even adults were talking about it more to me.
I think as early as possible. I think starting in like elementary school, but I think also parents should be talking about talking to their kids about this before elementary school, and this should be something that's taught through K through 12 and in college.
I feel like it's something that should be pretty integral to our education overall. I'd say kind of start off, introducing the issue when you're younger in 5th grade or so, and then kind of get more into depth. Maybe you kind of get into how bad things really were, in late middle school, early high school, and that's kind of when you can get into those horrible cases. So.
I believe it's good for the youth to learn about segregation and everything that has to do with the racial discriminatory issues in our country's past, and I believe that they should learn about it from middle school on. I believe it should be taught from a historic perspective from both sides, whether it's from the one side or the other. I think they should learn both perspectives and take their own opinion on that.
Honestly, it should be taught as early as possible, because I think that hate can be taught from a very young age, like starting before you even enter school from parents. I think that can be taught as much as anti-racism can be taught. So I think, honestly, the earlier, the better, even before school.
It's that race should not be a factor or determining a factor in things is such a big important thing. But at the same time, you have to balance not teaching your kids that there is such thing as race discrimination, because you don't want them to start their generation seeing two races as different things. You want to see them as equal. And so I think elementary is very important, starting there. But as you get older, teaching them more going more into depth, So elementary more basic and then going more into depth.
Kids would actually start understanding more around middle school age, actually understanding it and taking it seriously. Versus before then, I would feel or I at least would hope that they would all just not even consider that concept at all.
In conclusion, we found that most students believe that racial discrimination should be taught at a middle school education level, as elementary students would not fully grasp the subject. In addition, there was no true one majority among the people that we asked on how deep the subject of racial discrimination should be taught. Reporting for the Newsfeed, I'm Tucker Oakley.
We are now joined by Dr. Nina Ha, the director of the EPITA Plus Center at Virginia Tech. we will be discussing ways APITA Plus supports students and Dr. Ha's involvement in Dr. Johnson's study. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So what does your role as director for the APITA Plus Center entail?
Okay, so the APITA Plus Center is part of the Cultural and Community Centers under the Office for Inclusion and Diversity. Each center director is tasked with advocating for our communities, our respective communities, educating our communities as well as the larger communities, and advising. So to do this, we provide programs and events and outreach, as well as collaborating with our campus partners. And the outreach entails actually going beyond just Virginia Tech, but all over Virginia.
Okay, so what led you to participate in Dr. Johnson's study? I know that he was the one reaching out to people, but what led you to want to participate in that?
I actually saw him give a presentation on his work, and I was really compelled to, at some point, reach out to him to talk about maybe collaborations, and then when he emailed me, I felt it was necessary to participate, and especially to put or provide an APITA perspective.
Okay, so how much did you know about the subject of racial trauma prior to working with Dr. Johnson on this project? And if so, when did you start learning about it?
Oh, I started learning probably before you were born. My master's degree is in Asian American Studies, and from that, you have to learn about histories and culture. So basically, with that, if you know anything about Asian American Studies or Asian American history, it is about racialized trauma. So it's important to know about these histories through, not only through a racial trauma lens, but one way of looking at our histories and cultures, especially histories such as the, Japanese internment, right? Anti-APITA violence that just occurred just recently, right? So that's important to know what your histories are, especially the politics or the political history behind like policies that are created that are like the Chinese Exclusion Act. So ensuring that you know that those histories are really important.
Okay. So what specific resources do you and the APITA Plus Center provide for students who have been subject to racial trauma?
Since the pandemic, we have actually started with the APITA Mental Health Support Group, and from there it has grown into 5 support groups on this campus. So we provide support groups as well as nighttime guided meditation. So we really ensure that the students feel like they are served in that unique way. So that's how we do that.
Okay, and on the topic of the support groups, how do you feel the support groups help to prevent the development of racial trauma in general?
I don't think you can prevent it, but you can mitigate it, and you can find tools and skill sets to help to understand how to better acknowledge how to work it out, especially since in the APITA community as well and some racialized communities, we need to destigmatize the need to go to seek help.
Okay, so what might the public not know or misunderstand about your work?
Oh, wow. I think my work is so multifaceted. So I'm in a lot of meetings. I'm asked to give presentations, workshops. Our biggest component at the work that I do is provide programs and events. So we have multiple programs and events, but we're also tasked with being experts in our field as well. So making sure that people know what I do, especially on this campus. What's interesting is I always say that APITAs are not considered underrepresented, but we're definitely underserved, and to really be an advocate for this community, especially to really promote services that are needed for this particular community.
Okay, so what are some factors that contribute to racial trauma within the APITA Plus Center and the community in general?
Of course, racial microaggressions, right? As well as stereotypes, and part of the stereotypes is basically the model minority myth, right? As well as the perpetual foreigner. Mm-hmm. So those are just some of the challenges that many APITAs encounter.
So how would you define historical trauma or just intergenerational trauma?
Wow, that's loaded, also big. I think historical trauma is sometimes, for my students especially, they might not know their histories, so they might not know of what these histories entail. And so they might not understand why there are microaggressions, right? But these historical sort of acts or policies have been around for a long, long time. So that's where the intergenerational trauma comes into. Many of the students who come to the U.S. or come also because of war, right? Seeking a better life and not recognizing that they need to address all of these other things that are going on too. So really understanding that also the traumas are not just their traumas, but everybody else's as well.
Okay, and final question. Are there any big projects that you have been a part of that you would like to talk about?
Oh, well, every year the PETA Plus Center hosts or has a PETA Heritage Month. So I know AAPI month history is in May, but for Virginia Tech and many colleges and universities, we do it in April. So we have a lot of events and programs related to this sort of celebrating the PETA community. We also have ramen for Reading Day. So if you want free ramen on Reading Day, please come by the center as well.
Okay, well that's some awesome stuff. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll talk with both Dr. Ha and Dr. Johnson on how the project will be presented and what they hope people will learn from it.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. So if you want to talk to your kids, you have to get it trending.
No, you're doing it wrong.
Let's go.
Can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Welcome back to the newsfeed. Now we're joined by both Dr. Ha and Dr. Johnson to discuss how they believe the project will contribute to educational spaces. How are you guys doing today?
Thank you.
Fine, thanks.
Thank you guys for coming. So I have a few questions for the both of you. First one more directed at Dr. Johnson. So about the project, how will it be made when it's released? Who's going to be the first one to see it and where?
Yes. How public is this project going to be? This project will be open access. The target audience really for the project are educators, but the public and scholars are also will have access to it. But again, the bigger goal for the project is to empower educators, and so I will reach out to K-12 educators to bring awareness to the project when it's launched digitally. Again, so that they can have access to the essays that are being generated for it, interviews, focus groups that are being conducted for it, as well as curriculum resources.
Okay, so how do you guys hope that this will contribute to the current school system and the curriculum?
Do you want to go first?
I hope that again. I hope that it does get to like. I think that for a lot of researchers, their hope is that their work and their research makes its way into the public or makes its way into, for me, K-12 settings. And so again, I really want to promote and emphasize that the target audience are educators. It is open to the public, but I hope that educators find a way of using the curriculum resources, or even using portions of the interviews and scholarly essays that are generated, and incorporating those into their curriculum.
Okay, and how do you hope that this will contribute to the school system and the curriculum?
I think it'll provide educators with a language that they can use to better understand how to actually teach students, and also to actually give them the skill sets that they need to incorporate this type of work into any subject or material. So the thing I think is really important is that you can use this, the resources available to you to teach math, to teach science, to teach English, to teach social science, to really think about embedding the resources into every area of the curriculum, and not to be, oh, this is siloed into one subject and only one subject in particular, but to really expand it.
I appreciate that.
So I asked you both earlier how you guys felt racial trauma should be covered on a middle school and a high school level. So how do you feel it should be covered in primary schools?
So I think that, again, a conversation starter is that self-reflection of what do they think about, well, especially with primary age students, how are they beginning to identify themselves? Or what kind of identities are they interested in knowing more about? And then from there, if there's greater inquiry, to then begin asking again about your own family and your own family's histories. And then again, the next level up from that is making the connections of identities to social issues and to politics. I really appreciated what Dr. Haas had mentioned earlier about the connection of policies that have been created, and understanding the connection of those to historical events.
Great. And Dr. Ha, what do you think about coverage in primary schools?
I think you should start early. I think there's this false notion that, oh, they can only learn about racialized histories and traumas at a later time. Students are experiencing their racialized identities from the very beginning. And Dr. Beverly Tatum wrote this book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? It's still a great book because it really discusses how we start early. They start really young. So why aren't we addressing these matters? So I think your project will be so important, not just for educators, but also for parents.
Thank you.
As well as a way to think about, oh, you don't know what your kids are encountering, right? Racist moments happen at all stages of life, unfortunately. So I think that's really important to give everybody a tool to understand how to do that.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Ha, what ways do you hope that your participation in the project will inspire others to educate themselves about racial trauma?
I think education is a lifelong project, and I think also that you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Someone had said that. And so in education, it's not about being comfortable. It's about learning from the discomfort. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for both joining me today on the newsfeed.
Thank you.
That will wrap up this special edition of the newsfeed. A big thank you to our guests for joining us for today. If you have a story idea or even a talk show idea for the newsfeed, let us know. Send us an email at thenewsfeednrv@gmail.com, or you can connect with the newsfeed on our socials. Thanks for watching. I'm Madison Cho.